Today is November 6th, 2024. This is episode 80 of the Sports Daily College Basketball Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Mike Koomar. And Mike, the season started. We're back. We've got some games to discuss, and unfortunately, we have to start with your Baylor Bears. It was the high-profile matchup of night one. Out in Spokane Arena, technically a neutral game, but obviously, Gonzaga is in Spokane. Baylor goes across country, and it could not have gone worse. The Bulldogs drop 100 on them. The Gonzaga wins 101-63.
Yeah.
Tough one for Baylor.
Yikes. That was a kind of a meltdown right from the get-go for Baylor. But for any Baylor Nation that's watching tonight, I want y'all to relax a little bit. This was the first game of the year, first off. This is a long way until March. You've got one returning starter from a year ago. You've got a lot of talent that's just got to learn to gel together. So that's first off. You went to probably one of the toughest places to play in the country, in Spokane, against Gonzaga in the first game of the season against a really good opponent. You got to be nuts to do that. Only Scott Drew would do that. That is an absolutely crazy thing to do. And Baylor made that deal, and I kind of expected Baylor to lose. I didn't expect them to lose by almost 40 points. That was gross. But let's also look at some historicals of Baylor's first game of the season. We go back to 2018, my second year at Baylor. We lost to Texas Southern in the first game of the season. Really bad team. Baylor came back, ended up making the round of 32. That set up the season for the golden age of Baylor between 2020 and 2022. And then in the 2019-2020 season, opened up the season losing to a Washington team that finished second from the bottom of the Pac-12. How did they follow that up? They had 23 straight wins, and if the NCAA tournament had happened in 2020, they were one of the clear-cut favorites along with Kansas and Dayton. So Baylor doesn't always play well in these first games. You also look at their first two road games, the last two seasons. They lost by 30 to Marquette. And in last year, they lost by almost 30 to Michigan State, who was not very good last year. So Baylor, it's okay to struggle on the road this early, especially when you're playing in such a tough environment. I think it just says more about how good this Gonzaga team is. So maybe that's just a little bit of optimism in me, Sean, but Gonzaga just looked ridiculously good in that game. And they put Baylor to sleep early.
And for us on the East Coast, Mike, it was a game that I saw probably the first half of the first half.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that was enough to see who was going to win the basketball game. But Gonzaga is really good. I do think they deserve a lot of credit. They bring back a lot of talent from last year. And in the age of the portal, you don't see as much of that. You get Khalif Battle, who is my age. He's from New Jersey, played against him back in middle school. Don't know how he still has some eligibility, but he gives them a little something that they haven't had over the years. Greg, Ike, Hickman, Nemhard. These are pretty household names for college basketball fans.
Yeah.
So Gonzaga is going to be up there near the top of the conference. They've got an absolutely loaded non-conference slate. Let's just go through it quickly, Mike, because we've got a couple of non-conference slates that we want to talk about tonight. They host Arizona State, road game at San Diego State. They go to the Battle for Atlantis, where they'll start off with West Virginia and likely get two more good games in there. They have Kentucky in Seattle, again, sort of like a half-neutral game. And then they go and play UConn in New York City, which, again, is characterized as neutral, but road game. And then they have UCLA in Inglewood, California, technically a neutral, but, again, seems like a road game. So, Mike, if they're playing like this, they're going to get a lot of big wins early on. And while they did take a little bit of a step back last year in terms of their NCAA tournament seed, they still kept the Sweet 16 streak alive. But Gonzaga has a chance to really solidify themselves on the number one seed line if they can win some of these games in the non-con.
Yeah, you look at the way Gonzaga's gotten respect in the last several years. It's because they played such a good out-of-conference schedule. And look,
they have to
do it.
Yeah.
And they've done it year in and year out, and they've done so very impressively historically. Who knows? Maybe Mark Few had a little bit more, emphasis on this game after losing to Baylor in the championship a few years ago, and also in a heartbreaking fashion last or 2 years ago. But like this Gonzaga team, based off of last night's performance, which is it's just one game, right? It's one game in the first week of November. But this team has got to be a favorite to win the national championship. We'll see. Time will tell, right? We will learn a lot about this Gonzaga team in the first 2 months. We can't really say that for most of the NCAA. Gonzaga is probably one of the other, maybe Memphis is the other team that we could really say that for. But really excited to see kind of how the schedule plays out for them in the next 2 months. They could be, if they could steamroll into West Coast Conference play with just 1 or 2 losses, they're going to run away with the 1 seed here.
Yeah, it is. They're probably going to be in a lot of our conversations here before, in November, December, and after that it'll probably only be if they lose. But they've got a seriously good formula over there usually, and it's easy to when you beat a really good team by this much, it sends a message throughout the rest of the country. Yeah. Had they won by 15, you're like, all right, good win. Good team, but I think Baylor's still a pretty good team that'll finish near the top of the Big 12. And when you talk about analytics, this win might carry them significantly, even though it's just game 1.
Oh yeah, I mean this was, a lot of people had high hopes for this Baylor team this year. We had some really high profile transfers coming in, so we'll see how much this game is worth, but. If Baylor starts to get it together and play well in conference play, this win is going to mean so much for Gonzaga getting into the tournament based off of the metrics.
And for Baylor, Mike, they have a ton of new talent, like you already said. And the thing is I do think they'll be fine. But since they won the national championship, the defense hasn't been great, and it sort of looks like that might be the case again. I know when it's easy to say, all right, you got 100 dropped on you, you're not playing good defense, but Scott Drew's teams haven't been elite defensively when they've been really good, so maybe that's a concern early on.
Yeah, and you look at Baylor teams really up to the national championship team, had a lot of really great shooters with Baylor, but historically, Baylor in the early to mid Scott Drew era, they were focused on developing big guys, right? And big guys for the league. You think about Isaiah Austin, Rico Gathers, guys like that played in the league, Ish Wainwright. And we have not seen that since the national championship, really. Dominant big man play in 2021, and it's completely fallen off. Get it, Yves Misi got drafted in the first round last year, but aside from that, this Baylor team really struggles down low, and they also really struggle to defend the perimeter. So 2 things that are very uncharacteristic of Scott Drew teams before 2022 was bad defense and bad forward play. And we have seen a lot of that in the last couple of years for Baylor. And it's directly correlated to them underperforming in the NCAA tournament, where Baylor has not gotten out of the round of 32. They've been upset 3 straight years in the NCAA tournament and couldn't get to the Sweet 16. I think that's a direct correlation.
And Omier and Roach, who are, they've played a lot of basketball games, Mike. I'm not sure they'll play another game as bad as they did in this one. Roach is 2 for 9, and Omier did get 15 and 9, but he's the sort of guy where I wouldn't worry yet. They will give you more. And VJ Edgecombe will be a top 5 pick in the NBA draft, so he probably won't have a 2 for 11 game again. So I don't think it'll look this bad offensively. But it might look this bad defensively, and you'll probably get away with a couple of them. But when the shots aren't falling, it could get ugly. Baylor, it doesn't get any easier for the Bears up next. They head down to Bud Walton Arena on Saturday to play John Calipari and the Arkansas Razorbacks. It's a great opportunity for a bounce-back win. And, Mike, at the end of 2 games, if you're 1-1, that might not be the worst thing.
Yeah, so this game is going to be played actually at a neutral site. It's going to be in Dallas.
Okay.
But you look at, you think, that Dallas is an hour and a half from Baylor. Yeah, well, it's also the biggest city of concentrated Arkansas Razorback fans outside of Fayetteville, Arkansas. So it's going to be a neutral game. It might honestly have more Arkansas fans because of the excitement around the program this year. So, yeah. Baylor's got another huge game on Saturday. I think 7:30 p.m. They're at the American Airlines Center. So that's a big one. It's a huge bounce back opportunity for the Bears. You really hate to start 0-2, but if they can go 1-1, I think that shows the typical resilience of a Scott Drew team after they lose a big game like this.
All right, Mike, we'll go over to Las Vegas for the other high-profile non-conference game of night one. It was Ohio State taking on Rodney Terry in Texas, and Jake Diebler picks up a big win. The Buckeyes win 80-72. Both teams have a lot of new players, but before we get into all that, thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this was huge. Texas has got a lot of high ups going this season. They were preseason ranked 19th. A lot of good returning players for Texas, to include Weaver. Ohio State, I think we still don't really know much about what kind of season that they're going to have. But, yeah, huge statement win for Ohio State. They got out ahead of this game early. They got out to a 7-point lead at halftime. They never trailed in this game, too. This game got close in the second half. I think Texas got within 3 points at one point with about 9 minutes to go in this game. But then once again, that lead opened up, and it's not like this became an 8-point lead because Texas just fouled at the end. Ohio State had a consistent lead throughout the second half of this game, and a lot of that you can attribute to some really good field goal shooting percentages. They shot 50% from behind the arc. They also 45% field goal percentage. Texas just 25% from three. So Ohio State, they were able to withstand the turnovers. They made a lot of buckets, and they got a big win here in their first game of the season against the Longhorns.
And for Texas, Mike, Trey Johnson, the freshman, led the way at 29 points. He had an
great
excellent
first game.
He had an excellent game. But other than that, it was a lot of struggling. And Shedrick and Weaver are the returning starters there. They both struggled. And then the two high-profile transfers that they brought in, Kaluma from Kansas State with just 10 and 5, and Jordan Pope from Oregon State, who people are really high on this year. He just goes 2 for 8 from the field.
Yeah.
And then you just see 3 players come off the bench, Mike. 2 of them are Indiana State transfers, Julian Larry and Jason Kent. Now, they should provide something, at least behind the arc. They go a combined 1 for 6. So, really, at the end of the day, you had one good performance. And unfortunately, when you play a good team and one player plays well, you're going to lose.
Yeah, this is a huge concern for the Longhorns this year. And to be honest, I don't know if they had any players that were out of this game. But only playing 8 guys deep, and by 8 guys, they really only played 7.
Yeah.
When they run into foul trouble in SEC play, SEC is a pretty good conference this year. They're really going to struggle to be able to eke out games. So this is going to be a big one, I think, also for Rodney Terry. Last year, his team underperformed in the Big 12. They did not do what was expected of him. So I think there's a little bit of pressure of him going into this season to perform back to that level that he had that team during his year as an interim head coach.
And Mike, they were missing Tremont Mark, who was a pretty big piece there. And
there you go. Yeah,
I think he probably would have made the difference in this one because you could knock one of the starters down to the bench. But still, that's still just 8. You don't like to see that at this point of the season. And, maybe if in February you could live with 8, but in the SEC, I don't know if you can go through that entire gauntlet with just the 8 or 9 players. But I do think that the ones that they do play are really good, and they'll probably be better than they were in this game, all of them except for Trey Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, what a great first game.
Yeah, he kept them in that game. This would have been a 20-point loss if he didn't show up to play.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Incredibly impressive. I do want to point out, Sean, that the one Texas game I am really looking forward to this year is in late January when they get to take on Chris Beard's Ole Miss running Rebels in Oxford, Mississippi. So that's going to be a really fun one. I think this could be a good Texas team. I just worry about just the lack of minutes that bench guys had in this game and what that's going to look like going forward for them.
And we talk about it for football all the time, Mike, with Joe Meade. This SEC is really stacked with a ton of good teams. I think for now, it just looks like Texas might get dragged into the middle of this pack. There's a ton of tough games, a ton of road games. We're looking at, an 8-9 bid league right now, and it just seems like Texas is probably a step down from the top of this league, whether it's Auburn or Alabama or Tennessee. But I still do think they will be ranked at most points in the year and will make the tournament, but I do think they are a step below. All right, we'll turn it over to Ohio State. Bruce Thornton, their only returning starter, he puts in 25-5, a good performance from him. And then they get the bounce-back transfer in Michi Johnson, Micah Parrish from San Diego State, and then the 2 5-star freshmen who disappointed in their first years at other schools, Sean Stewart and Aaron Bradshaw. That starting lineup for Ohio State is going to be really good.
Yeah, I mean, Ohio State, what a great job they've done in the transfer portal this year. They had a pretty interesting season last year where they fell apart and then kind of got it back together right before the end of the year, but it was too little too late. So I'm excited about this transfer team, this class. And usually, like we said, we talked about Baylor, they really struggled to gel in that first game of the season when they played a high-profile team. Ohio State has not struggled. They had a really impressive game this year, or this week, and they should be excited. They've got a couple of other good games coming up too, Sean. They've got Texas A&M next Friday.
On the road.
I'm not sure where that game's going to be. It's at Reed Arena. So that's going to be down in College Station. So that'll be a tough game. That'll be another really good one for the Buckeyes. And then they also take on Pitt before they start the conference season. So a couple of good opportunities for them to get their feet wet, but it's not an incredibly tough out-of-conference schedule.
Yeah, and you wouldn't really blame a coach with this much turnover on taking it easy early on. They did. I don't know if Jake Diebler agreed to this. I'm sure it was years in advance. He was an assistant, so maybe he had a say in it. But you go on the road to a Texas A&M team that already lost. They're going to need to win. You have the Pitt game. You have Auburn in December in Georgia, so pretty much essentially a road game there. And then you play Kentucky at Madison Square Garden at the end of December. So there's a bunch of good opportunities for wins here for Ohio State. And it seems so far that they are starting where they left off last year. They were playing really good basketball when Diebler took over, and including beating Purdue and winning a couple games there late. But I do think that they'll probably get more from their starting forwards and Sean Stewart and Aaron Bradshaw. They both give 2 points and 4 fouls. But Devin Royal and Mobley Jr. off the bench sort of canceled that out. I mean, they don't have a super deep team, 33 bench points, but 30 of those came from 2 players. But Ohio State certainly looking like they're going to put last year behind them. All right, Mike, we're going to change gears a little bit here to a conference that was in play on Monday, and pretty much all the teams were in action, and this is the Big East. Now, Marquette and St. John's aside, they both looked really good and convincing wins. But, Mike, every other game was close. Now, the Big East team did win all of them, but you had Butler winning in a close game against Missouri State, Providence beating Central Connecticut by 4, Xavier beating Texas Southern by 7, Seton Hall beating St. Peter's by 4, Villanova beating Lafayette by 12, and DePaul needing overtime to beat the Screaming Eagles of Southern Indiana. So, Mike, if you want to pick one or two teams to talk about here, every single one of them, it's a close call, but I guess at the end of the day, they all picked up W's.
Yeah, I mean, this is really concerning for the Big East. It would be one thing if, a couple teams had close games against somebody in, the Missouri Valley Conference or whatever. But, I mean, we're playing tight in the Patriot League. You even look at games currently going on, Sean. Villanova is down by 3 points to Columbia University.
And Eric Dixon's back for Villanova. He missed game 1.
And there's only 10 minutes left in that game. Similarly, Georgetown, they're up by 5 right now against the Lehigh Mountain Hawks. Lehigh lost by 46 points to a Northwestern team on Monday. So Lehigh's not very good, right? I think we can agree on that. And they're giving Georgetown the business right now, down by 5 with 7 minutes to go. A lot of concern out of the Big East right now, Sean. You don't want to overreact this early on in the season, but it's concerning when you see the entire conference struggle on opening night against seemingly easy teams, right? And I understand DePaul's not going to be a very good team, But Southern Indiana, I didn't even know that was a Division I school.
It wasn't until a couple years ago.
There you go, right? St. Peter's is not a good program. Seton Hall probably could have and should have lost that game. Providence is supposed to be one of the better teams in the Big East this year, and they almost lost to Central Connecticut State University, a game that they trailed at halftime, a game that came down to the wire. Central Connecticut State was up with 2 minutes to go in this game. They were up 53-52 going into the last 2 minutes. So I'm really concerned about the Big East, Sean. And I think Providence is my biggest concern right now. It is early on in the season, so you do not want to overreact. But when your entire conference struggles to win in their opening week, that's a concern, a significant concern.
And, Mike, if you go into the numbers deeper, none of these teams are, let alone top 100 teams, none of them are in the top 200.
They're quad four. Almost all of them are going to be quad four.
It's not like these teams could find themselves in a 14 seed like at Oakland or a 15 seed like St. Peter's a couple of years ago. All of these teams are outside the top 200, which is essentially the bottom half of Division I. All these games were at home. You'd see one of them, you say, all right, you got the job done, you played badly. But to see 7 of these games kind of all going on at the same time, really alarming. And FS1 has the whip around Big East coverage, and they were
that was ugly.
They were just like, all right, this one's not going well, so let's go here. Oh, this one's not going well either. But yeah, that was shocking. Now, St. John's, Fordham was the best. Fordham was the best opponent, and St. John's won by 32.
Yeah, I was about to say the best 2 opponents last night were Fordham and Stony Brook, and those were the teams that lost by 32 and 40. Right, the other teams are all like middle of quad 4. They're not even like quad 3. These are quad 4 teams that barely the Big East scraped wins off of. Not good.
So that is something to look out for here. It does look like UConn is opening their season tonight. They are beating Sacred Heart by 30 in the second half. And watch this Columbia-Villanova game closely here as we're heading towards the second to last media timeout, and Columbia has got a 5-point lead. Georgetown up by 3 with 6:20 left now. It's likely going to be the same thing. The Big East team will likely come up on top. But, wow. I mean, this is seriously concerning. UConn is ranked 3rd, but that is pretty much just because they're defending champions. They have a significantly less talented roster than last year. Marquette is still really good. Cam Jones is really good. He scored 30 for them, but still they lost their 2 best players from last year in Kolek and Iguodaro. So the Big East, a couple years ago, Mike, we talked about it being in the best spot it maybe has ever been since they had the 16 teams with Patino coming in and all that, but that seems to have been completely erased for now. But, all right, we'll be sure to keep that in mind for the Big East. All right, Mike, we got one more topic today. The videos in the future, we're going to try and keep them around 30 minutes. We're going to go to the American Conference, which is getting a ton of publicity for who's winning in football, but we're going to talk about basketball. It's the Memphis Tigers. Now, with the way that the American Conference is set up, with Houston now not in it as of last year, with Florida Atlantic losing Dusty May, this league is not going to be as good as it has been. It might be a one-bid league, but at least Memphis is preparing themselves for the fact that if they do get picked off in the tournament, if they win some games here, they should at least have a chance of getting to the tournament as an at-large. But, Mike, they did start off the season with a 8-point win over SEC Missouri. A lot's on the line for Penny Hardaway here.
Yeah, I mean, this is a do-or-die season for Penny, right? We've had a lot of talk since he's been the head coach at Memphis. Last year, they got off to a great start to the season, right? And then they fell apart miserably when they got into the conference season. Lost a lot of bad games. So they are definitely the favorite in this one. I say watch out for Florida Atlantic. They've got former Baylor assistant coach John Jacobs that came there, and he recruited some really good talent. They had a really convincing 33-point win against last year, a good Indiana State program. Not the same program this year, but a really good start to the season for FAU. Another storyline in this conference, obviously, we're going to be thinking a lot about South Florida this season. Their coach's tragic death a couple of weeks ago. They've got a really good team. They've supposed to have one of the better teams in the conference. They suffered a loss in their first game of the year, a 15-point loss to the Florida Gators. So you got a couple of good teams. So there is a chance that you get more than one bid, but you can only count on one. So Memphis, they're going to have a pretty good out-of-conference schedule. They play some challenging teams. They get to play UNLV. They play in the Maui Invitational, so they start off with UConn, and they're going to have a couple more games after that. And then they've got Ole Miss at home, and then they've got road games against Clemson and UVA. So they get to play plenty of Power 5, Sean. It'll be interesting to see how they do that. But like you said earlier, Penny Hardaway, this is a put up or shut up season for him. I believe the pressure's on.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise around Memphis, just in the fact that they do really support the basketball program there with a lot of NIL money. They have a big fan base. They play at the FedEx Forum. They play at an NBA arena and have pretty good attendance numbers. And, they've been okay over the years. Last year didn't go so well. It really, really ended up poorly after they sort of had a similar slate in the non-conference, and they did all right through there, but they lost too many games in the American, and FAU ended up running the table in that conference tournament and was the only team. But they do bring in Tyrese Hunter. They have Dane Danger, but other than that, I'm not sure this is Penny's most talented team. Certainly he's had a bunch of really good teams there, but this is sort of one of the headlines to watch early on. Them and Gonzaga, their NCAA tournament seed will be pretty much dependent on what they do here in the non-conference, as long as things do not completely go off the rails in their conference tournaments. But
and with those two transfers, Sean, Travis Hunter, very inconsistent season last year with Texas. There were some games where he would shoot 6 or 7 from 3, and the next game would shoot 2 of 15, right? He's a very inconsistent player even within games, so we'll see if that consistency has kind of leveled out a little bit. But then Dane Danger. Danger had an incredible second half of the season for Illinois. And he had probably, arguably, the best Big Ten tournament of any other player in the Big Ten. Had a dominant performance against his home team, Minnesota, and a bunch of other key plays down the stretch for Illinois to win the Big Ten last year. So I am excited to see how Danger will help Memphis and see if Travis Hunter can kind of correct some of those lack of consistencies for Memphis this year.
But, Mike, that is all we have for everybody today, other than a slight preview of Friday's big game at Allen Fieldhouse, the Roy Williams Bowl. North Carolina heads out there to play Kansas. It's 9-1. It's 7 o'clock on ESPN2. This is rare that we get this sort of game this early in the season.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really exciting game. Kansas had potentially one of the most disappointing seasons last year. It's supposed to be a really good team going into the season. Clearly, they had a lack of depth. A couple of players get hurt, and the season was over for KU before they got into March. That's for sure. So we'll see. I was really high on Kansas at the start of the season last year, if you remember, Sean. Once again, they're the top-ranked team in college basketball. So we'll see. It seems like they're kind of have a little bit of a revenge tour this year. They're a little bit deeper. On the other side of the ball, North Carolina didn't have a really comfortable first win of the season. They beat Elon, but this game was a lot closer than it should have been.
I think it was tied at the under 8.
Yeah, there was a tie ball game with 6.5 minutes to go. Actually, Elon had the lead before RJ Davis made a jumper with about 6.5 minutes to go. And then Elon only scored 5 minutes the rest of the game. UNC kind of pulled away at the very end. But not a convincing win in my eyes for UNC. We'll see if that was just some sluggish start to the season. But RJ Davis is back once again. This is going to be his 5th season with the Tar Heels. He's played significant minutes every single season there. So he's going to be the key leader for the Tar Heels. He had 24 points against Elon this year, or last game. So we'll see. My pick in this game is going to be Kansas. It's a home game for them. They've got a lot on their shoulders as they get ready to try to have a big rebound here this year. I go with the Jayhawks.
Yeah, I would have to lean that way too. It just doesn't. It's not in their nature to lose.
Yeah.
Non-conference games, any games at home, really. But I do think they are a better team than North Carolina, and I think they'll show it. But I'll definitely be tuning in either way. Saturday, we have a couple big games. We can go through them quickly here. Tennessee on the road at Louisville. Tennessee has looked a little shaky in their exhibitions. Pat Kelsey has Louisville revamped with at least some talent. It's a good opportunity for them to pick up a big win early on.
Yeah, I got to see Louisville in action before I pick them to win anything, considering how bad they've been the last few years. So it's a completely different team from the last couple of years, I will say. Tennessee, no more Dalton Connect that they can rely on to bail them out. But I'm still going to go with Tennessee to get an early out-of-conference win.
I'm going to go with Louisville. I think they looked really good in Game 1 against Moorhead, and Indiana did beat Tennessee on the road in an exhibition, and they are struggling a little bit on offense without Dalton Connect, who was the second best player in college basketball last year. All right, we've got Baylor, Arkansas. Mike, we did talk about that already. It will be Arkansas' second game. They're in action tonight against Lipscomb, but be interesting to see what Arkansas can do there. And the final game we'll preview here is Auburn playing Houston in the Mattress Firm Battleground 2K24 game in the Toyota Center in Houston. Technically a neutral game, but two teams here that are expected to compete in the very top of their conferences.
Yeah, you gotta love a game sponsored by Mattress Firm.
Yeah.
I like Houston in this one. Houston's returning a lot of talent from a year ago, to include L.J. Cryer, outstanding player for them. Their season really kind of hit a pause in March. They stumbled in the Sweet 16, I believe, and kind of had an much earlier than expected exit. But I think the Cougars are out for revenge right now. Still haven't seen Auburn play this year. I'm going to take the Cougs to win big in a neutral site against them. And for the Bears, my Baylor very strong. We mentioned they're going to be taking on Arkansas and Dallas.
Yep.
I'm going to predict a 9-point win for the Bears. Scott Drew teams are historically resilient, and I like the Bears to respond in a big way after getting their teeth kicked in against Gonzaga earlier this week.
I'm going to go the other way in both of them, Mike. I'm
Nice.
going with Arkansas being really good this year, just because the game needs Calipari to be this kind of villain and be like, hey, Kentucky, you were good because of me. I wasn't good because of you. And they'll be a good team either way, whether they win or lose this. But and I do think Auburn is long enough and good enough offensively where they might be able to do enough against Houston's kind of high pressure, swarming defense. Yeah, Houston just ran out of gas last year. They had too many injuries, and they are reloaded, and they do have a lot of talent, but so does Auburn, and they're up by 25 at halftime against a pretty good Vermont team right now. Janai Broom hasn't really had to do much. Baker Mazzara as well, and Auburn too. Remember, Mike is a little bit on a revenge tour after they got knocked off by Yale in the round of 64 last year. So a lot of early headlines here in the college basketball season as teams try and get underway. A lot of good games here, Michael. We haven't even had the Champions Classic yet, which is next Tuesday. So that'll be really good too. But that is all we have for you today. Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to check out our other content, whether it's college football or college hoops.